Hey everyone, welcome back to Reading with Tatiana. Today I'm reviewing Harry's Trees by Jon Cohen, and I gave this book a 4 out of 5. Today, my Booktuber Shoutout goes out to Gatling XYZ. I came across their Booktube channel when I was looking at Booktube newbie tags, who is new to the Booktube community. I would link the channel down below if you want to show some support. Right now, their intention with their channel is to do book reviews, short story recommendations, and also some writing, and they're going to focus on fantasy and sci-fi with the occasional non-fiction book. Again, I'll link their channel down below if you want to show them some support. And as always, if you're watching this video, I always appreciate if you watch my content. If you like my content, to hit the subscribe button, give this video a thumbs up, and comment down below if you have read Harry's Trees by Jon Cohen. This book was published in 2018, so it's been out for a few years now, and the genre I would put it under is magic realism and a bit of contemporary romance. A bit about the author Jon Cohen. So he was a former critical care nurse and now he is currently an author. In addition to Harry's Trees, he has written 2 other books. One is called The Man in the Window, the second one is called Max Lakeman and a Beautiful Stranger. He is also the co-screenwriter of Minority Report, which is directed by Steven Spielberg. So Jon Cohen seems to be very diverse in his talents, and he currently lives outside Philadelphia with his wife. I really enjoy, I want to add to the genre of why I think it's contemporary romance, because it's very rare that I come across books written by men that have a focus on contemporary romance. And when I read this book, the main character is also a male. When I read this book, I had a book club discussion with my coworkers who are all females, and we kind of talked about the lens of it being from a male's perspective by a male author. And there's romance in this book because very often when I read contemporary romance, it's in like a woman's perspective. So I do feel this book is for the, I guess, a hetero man to read if you're interested in contemporary romance, because they're kind of like the main character and it's from a male's perspective, if that makes sense. So yeah, I thought that was interesting because I personally don't know any men that read contemporary romance. I find that a lot of men that I know skew more towards like fantasy or like nonfiction or like thrillers or mysteries. So I think if you're a hetero man that is interested in a perspective, like a perspective of a man in contemporary romance, I think Jon Cohen's books may be for you. So let's get into the premise of the book. So the first one is Harry, aka Harry's Trees. So we learn that at the beginning that he is in his 30s, he's married to the love of his life, Beth, and he's kind of obsessed with like winning the lottery, so he can finally quit his dull government office job and pursue his idea of running a business called Harry's Trees, because Harry loves trees a lot. Unfortunately, one day he goes to get a lottery ticket, and he crosses the street to go to a convenience store to get his lottery ticket, and then his wife Beth is killed in a freak construction site accident. So that's how the story starts. It's like the first chapter, so not a spoiler. And then the other side of the story is we meet Amanda, who lives like more in a rural area, and her husband also dies from a heart situation aneurysm. So very unfortunate, and her husband Dean leaves behind Amanda and Oriana. So with these 2 widowed people, Harry and Amanda, their paths kind of cross. So basically Harry one day decides to just go into the forest, into the rural land, and he decides to, kill himself. And when he hangs himself on a tree, the rope snaps, and by chance he meets Oriana and Amanda, and basically this is the start of their story. And then how it starts is also because Oriana, because she's very young, I think she's like 7 or 9 years old, and then basically since the death of her dad Dean, she kind of like loses herself in the forest. She kind of like applies fairy tales and stories to her real life, and she really believes that her dad has come back as like a red-tailed hawk. So that's where the magic realism kind of comes in. There's like a lot of like speckle and sprinkle of fairy tales into this like rural landscape, and I don't want to ruin the story anymore, but it's just very lovely because you get Harry, you get Amanda, who are both widowed people, and by chance both their partners had died on the same day a year ago. And then also you get Ariana, who's this child who's very adamant that her late father is here to tell her a story and bring her a lesson that draws her, Harry, and Amanda together. So this book is just really good, and I really enjoyed it. I think you do have to suspend some belief in reality, but still very enjoyable. Some common themes in this book. The first one is, I think, very evident, is the idea of grieving, of losing your spouse, of losing a parent figure, and how we deal with that. We really see how grief is, I guess, personified throughout this book, and how all three characters, Harry, Amanda, and Ariana, move past their loss. And it's very beautiful how this book captures it, at least for me. Other characters in this book that also talks about grief, or at least loss of love, is Olive, who I didn't mention. She is the town librarian, and she has a lost love from her youth. And her side story actually made the book a 4 for me. The main story of Harriet, Amanda, and Ariana was more like, honestly, a 3. But Olive's story of her lost love in her youth and her story and growth through this book really became like a 4 for me. Also, the idea of being lonely, what that means for different people. In this town that Amanda lives in, it's very rural, and there's actually like all these men who happen to be single and kind of pine or obsess or are really interested in Amanda, especially she's now a widowed person, and just the idea of how loneliness manifests in each of these men. So I thought that was very interesting to observe as well. The other one is the belief in magic and fairy tales and love stories, and how we can learn lessons from these stories from our childhood. And the other one is, without spoiling the book because I think it's worth reading, is the idea of paying it forward and giving back to society, and how that's really important. If you're in a space to give back, why wouldn't you? And also, how would you do that? What I didn't like about this book, I did give it a 4, but there were a few things I didn't like about it. It was just that, these side stories kind of saved the rating. So the first one was, because this book is called Harry's Trees, we come to learn a lot about trees, and we also learn a lot about Harry's obsession about trees. So I think this book, it's not like a long book, but it's kind of like thicker, I guess. I feel like they could pare down a lot of the tree descriptions, because as someone who does enjoy looking at trees and being amongst the trees, I didn't feel that many descriptions about trees, and that could have been cut off or, pared down quite a bit. I felt there were lots of side characters that didn't need to be there, but I understand why they were there, but I think if they weren't there, it wouldn't have ruined the book. One of them is Wolf, which is Harry's brother. I understand I wanted him as the wolf in comparison to Big Bad Wolf, but I feel his character, if he wasn't there, there's still enough bad guys from fairy tales to propel the lessons learned. And then also, I didn't really believe why Amanda was attracted to Harry, especially after describing what her husband Dean was like. I had to really suspend disbelief for that. What I did like about this book is, I mentioned earlier, I love the librarian Olive. I thought she was amazing. I love how her story weaves through in and out throughout the whole book, and how the book ultimately ends with her story. I also love Oriana, the daughter of Amanda, as a character. She is just a child, but I love how she is so bold, she was so admirable and relentless. I also love all the side characters, even though they weren't that big. I love Ronnie and Hoop. I also love Stu. Even though he was a bad guy, I think the way John, the author, wrote and described him made me really see who he was. Kind of like Peter Pettigrew from Harry Potter. Just kind of this like mischievous side character, and I really enjoyed it. And it's a book about books. I always enjoy it, so it's a lot of call out to fairy tales, a lot of call out to libraries, a lot of call out to why books are so important and the impact they have on people. So I really enjoyed these aspects of this book. On Goodreads, this book on average a 4.19 out of 5. I think that's very accurate, especially because it's been out for a few years now. So reasons why people didn't like it is they felt it was a bit tedious and drawn out. I can agree with that, especially about the trees. They felt the language and sex scenes were a bit cringe. That was interesting because my book club also felt that way too. But I wonder, because it's written by a man's perspective, and maybe it's geared towards more of a man audience, maybe a man wouldn't find it cringy, but for me it was a bit cringy. But if you watch my reviews, I also don't enjoy smut, so people also felt it was trying too hard to be whimsical. And, I can agree with that. However, the genre is magic realism, so I think you do have to suspend that part of it. Reasons why people liked it is they liked the beautiful imagery, they really rooted for the characters despite them not being the good guys and the bad guys, and just wanting like a good outcome for them overall. People also love the idea of that It's a modern day fairy tale. Why I think you should read this book? I think you should read it if you love fairy tales growing up and just having it interwoven into like a modern day adult book. I also think, as I mentioned a few times now, if you want to read a romance written by a man for a man's perspective, I think this book is also for you. Now I'll share how this book made me feel, because if you asked me a week, a year, 5 years from now, I probably won't remember exactly what the book was about, but I'll also remember how it made me feel. So this book, after reading it, it made me feel very magical. It made me feel like, I do live in a modern world where, fairy tales don't exist in my everyday life, but it's always kind of fun to romanticize and fantasize about your life, which I did a lot when I was younger, especially in my teenage years. So this book just kind of made me feel very magical. Thank you for watching until the end of my book review for Harry's Trees by Jon Cohen. If you've read this book, I'd love to hear what you thought down below in comments below. And if you've made it to the end of this video, I always appreciate if you hit the subscribe button. And I'll see you guys next time. Bye!